Welcome to another deep dive where we, take a deep dive into some pretty fascinating stuff. Today, we're going to tackle Chhava, a movie that's making some noise, generating buzz for its pretty ambitious take on, a legendary Maratha ruler. And it's during a period of, intense conflict in India.
Chhava just came out last month, actually. It's directed by Laxman Utekar, and it stars Vicky Kaushal, you know him, and Rashmika Mandanna. And it's based on the novel, a really famous one, too. Same name, Chhava, by Shivaji Sawant. So, people who love the book, they're already, expecting a lot.
Right, because it's like you've got this beloved book, and then the story itself is already, steeped in history. I mean, the expectations had to be sky high for this one. So for anyone listening who maybe hasn't brushed up on their history lately, can you give us, the Spark Notes version? Who is this movie actually about?
Okay, so the movie is about Chhatrapati Sambhaji Maharaj. He was Shivaji Maharaj's son, the iconic one.
Okay.
And he was the second Chhatrapati. That's a title, by the way. It means supreme ruler of the Maratha Empire. His reign lasted from, 1681 to 1689. And that whole time, it was constant struggle, fighting against the Mughal emperor, Aurangzeb.
Yeah.
A powerful guy.
Okay, so we've got a powerful ruler going up against an even more powerful empire. Am I getting David and Goliath vibes here?
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good comparison. The Marathas, under Sambhaji Maharaj specifically, they were really well known for their guerrilla warfare tactics.
Yeah.
Using what they knew about the Deccan terrain, all that, to their advantage. Especially since they were fighting against, the Mughal forces, which were much bigger.
So today we're not just talking about a movie. This is a deep dive into Sambhaji Maharaj's entire legacy. We're talking understanding all the complicated stuff about Aurangzeb's reign and then seeing how Chhava, the movie, tries to handle all of this historical baggage. Oh, and we can't forget there was also that pretty big controversy around how they portrayed a traditional dance.
Oh, yeah, that's right. It's this intersection of art, and history and how we interpret culture. Definitely something worth really digging into.
Let's start with Sambhaji Maharaj. I've always heard that he was this incredibly brave guy, known for being brilliant military leader, and that he was constantly at war with the Mughals and they had a much bigger army.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
During the time he was in charge, he fought off so many Mughal attacks. He was protecting his kingdom from basically being swallowed up by the Mughals. And it's important to remember that back then, the Mughal Empire, those under Aurangzeb, they were at their peak. It's huge. They controlled most of the Indian subcontinent.
Wow. So to refuse to back down when you're up against an empire like that definitely makes him seem like a symbol of resistance for the Maratha people.
Exactly. Just think about how strong, how determined he must have been, and the strategies he came up with, to face that kind of pressure. He was big on forts, expanded them, made them stronger, and then used them as bases, when he was fighting. Made it super hard for the Mughals to completely conquer, Maratha territory.
And then, tragically, he ended up being captured and executed by Aurangzeb. And there are some accounts that say, that it was because he wouldn't convert to Islam, which, if it's true, makes him seem even more like, someone who stood by his principles, even when he was facing death.
Yeah, it's a powerful story, isn't it? Even though he was defeated, he became, a martyr, right? Which just made his legacy even stronger as this hero, the ultimate symbol of how resilient the Marathas were.
So that brings us to Aurangzeb, the other big, figure in this whole historical drama. He seems to be one of those rulers who, still causes arguments, even today.
Oh, 100%. Aurangzeb is, he's a really complicated figure. He was a brilliant military leader, no doubt, and an amazing administrator, too. Under him, the Mughal Empire, it grew to be the biggest it ever was. Think about it. It stretched from where Afghanistan is today all the way down south to the Deccan Plateau.
But I've also read about some of his policies, right? And they're, controversial to say the least, even by today's standards. Didn't he bring back the jizya tax, the one non-Muslims had to pay?
That's right, the jizya tax. Historically, it was imposed on non-Muslims in Islamic states. But his great-grandfather, Akbar, he actually got rid of it. He was all about religious tolerance. So when Aurangzeb decided to bring it back, a lot of people saw that as a step backwards. He was going for this way more orthodox, stricter interpretation of Islam.
And he also, ordered the destruction of a bunch of Hindu temples, right? Can't imagine that went over well with many people.
You're right. That was another thing that caused a lot of problems. Historians still debate, like, what exactly happened. But the fact that temples were destroyed, on top of that jizya tax, well, it made people resent him. And it even led to some revolts against his rule, especially down in the Deccan. So it's this mix of, like, undeniable expansion, the empire growing, but then these policies that some people saw as straight up oppressive. And that's what makes his legacy so complicated, so debated, even now.
So you've got this complicated ruler, and then you've got this like totally defiant Maratha king, and now we've got Chhava, this movie that's trying to bring all of this clash of, well, titans to life.
It's a pretty big swing, right? Not just because, they've got this whole huge historical setting to work with, but they're also adapting a novel. And it's a novel that a lot of people consider to be like a cultural touchstone.
It's like they wanted to go big or go home. Big visuals, all the details of that time period, and of course you get that automatic drama that comes with these like historical epic movies. They definitely weren't going for like a small art house film vibe.
Nope, definitely not. I mean, even the trailers make it clear how epic they wanted this to be.
Yeah.
But when you aim that high, people are going to be watching you.
Yeah.
Especially with a story like this where things are so sensitive and so important.
And that's where we get to our Lazim dance controversy. This is where, artistic license and historical accuracy, they get, well, a little blurry, right?
Yeah, for sure. This whole controversy, it really gets at, like, how we understand and then show history, on film. And it's even trickier when you're dealing with people that so many revere, like they're almost sacred.
Okay, so, like, break it down for us. What happened? This scene, it was with Sampaji Maharaj and his wife Yesubai, right?
Yep, that's right. It showed them doing the Lazim dance. It's a folk dance, very traditional, known for being really energetic and using these, like, wooden sticks.
Okay, which sounds pretty harmless, right? But I guess some people didn't see it that way.
Yeah, it caused a huge backlash. You had historians, cultural groups, all saying that there's zero proof that Sampaji Maharaj ever did this dance, especially not with his wife. They felt like it was just made up, something added for drama, and that it actually kind of, well, diminished his image as this warrior king.
So they were worried that even if it was made up, that people would start to see him and even Maratha culture differently.
Exactly. It's not really about the dance itself. It's about how we remember historical figures, how we show them to the world. Even something small like this could end up making people think about the past in the wrong way.
And the director, Laxman Utekar, he ended up taking the scene out of the movie, right? What was his reason for doing that?
He did. And in his statement, he said that he never wanted to disrespect Sambhaji Maharaj or any Maratha traditions. He said that he just wanted to make these historical figures more, well, human, to show that they had, more personal sides, that they were relatable, not just these public figures.
I mean, I get it, Even the greatest warriors probably had times where they were just happy and enjoying life. Showing that human side, it doesn't necessarily mean their accomplishments are any less important.
That's true. And it's a constant struggle for filmmakers.
Yeah.
How do you make these people from the past feel real, feel relatable, but then also stay true to the history books?
But then you also have people who really care about historical accuracy, and it makes sense that they'd be upset, Especially when it has to do with figures who are revered, like they're almost sacred. It's this tricky balancing act.
Totally. And that's what makes this whole Lazim dance controversy so interesting to me. It brings up all these questions about what filmmakers are responsible for when they're dealing with, history, especially when it's sensitive.
It's like, this isn't just about Chhava. It's about every single movie that tries to show us what happened in the past, which is a good place to stop for now. But before we move on, I want to ask everyone listening, what's your first reaction to this? Does knowing why the director put that scene in and then why he took it out, does that change how you see things? Think about it, okay, because we're about to go even deeper. This whole Lazim dance thing, it really makes you think about how hard it must be to make a historical film. How do you balance, like, being accurate and telling a good story?
It's tough. You're always walking this line. And it's even more complicated when you're dealing with people like, Sambhaji Maharaj and Aurangzeb. They're not just, like, historical figures. They're also symbols. Important to a lot of people's culture and political identity.
Right. So it's not enough to get the facts right. You got to understand what these guys represent to people, like their memory. So when a director decides to take on a story like this, where do they even begin?
I think the first big thing is like figuring out how much the story they can tell.
Mm.
You can't cram everything into a movie, all the events, all the battles, the political stuff. It would take like a whole TV series to do that.
Especially with someone like Sambhaji Maharaj, right? His reign was like nonstop action. He was battling the Mughals, making alliances, trying to keep his kingdom together. Yeah, you need a mini-series for sure.
Exactly. So the director, they have to pick and choose, which moments are the most important? What parts of Samhaji's personality or even Aurangzeb's, what do they want to show?
So let's say you're Laxman Utekar, the guy who directed Chhava. You've got this epic story, this incredible book to work from, and you know everyone's going to have an opinion. What kinds of like creative decisions are you stressing over?
Well, the first thing I'd think about is how to show, the scale of the conflict. This is the Mughal Empire we're talking about. They had a huge army, tons of resources. And then you've got the Marathas who were known for being, quick and using guerrilla tactics.
So visually, I mean, how do you show that? Big battle scenes with thousands of people? Or do you focus in on like smaller, more strategic fights that show how clever the Marathas were?
That's a big one. And then you got to figure out the characters themselves. Sambhaji Maharaj. How do you show how brave he was, how good he was at military strategy? How do you make him feel like a real person, not just a name from history?
Because to people today, these historical figures can feel kind of distant, like they're almost mythical.
Exactly. So the director's got to find ways to, like, humanize them.
Yeah.
Show their struggles, their doubts, times when they were vulnerable.
Which brings us back to, well, the Lazim dance thing. That scene, whether it was historically accurate or not, it was probably trying to show a more personal side of Sambhaji, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. And it shows how even when you're trying to make a historical figure more relatable, it can backfire if you're not careful.
It's like you're messing with people's heroes, the people they look up to. And if they feel like you're being disrespectful, well, they're going to get mad.
For sure. And it reminds us that filmmakers, when they're telling these historical stories, they got to be aware of, the culture and politics. They're not just telling a story, they're dealing with history that people still care about a lot.
Okay, so let's talk about Aurangzeb. We've already touched on how complicated his reign was, all the military victories, but then those policies, So how do you put all of that into a movie? Do you make him the bad guy? Or like a pragmatist? Or maybe something in between?
That's a tough one. It would be easy to just, make him a villain. Focus on all the stuff he did that people today see as negative.
Especially since he was fighting Sambhaji Maharaj, who's usually shown as, like, the hero, right? The guy defending against the Mughals.
Yeah, but that wouldn't be telling the whole story. Aurangzeb was a devout Muslim. He was great at administration, and he knew military strategy. He was also a product of his time, The politics and religion of 17th century India. It all shaped him.
So the director's got to show all of that, the good and the bad.
Exactly. And it means really thinking about what events to show, what the characters say, even how he looks. Is he always serious and intimidating? Or are there times when he seems vulnerable, or conflicted?
It's crazy to think about how all those little choices can change how the audience sees a historical figure.
It really is. And it just goes to show that no matter how much research you do, a historical film is still just one person's interpretation. It's seen through their eyes.
Which means that the people watching, we got to think critically. We can't just sit back and absorb it all. We got to ask questions, consider different points of view. And if something makes us curious, well, we should go learn more about it.
I agree 100%. A good historical film, it could be the beginning of, like, a much deeper journey into the past. It could open up new ways of thinking, make us question what we thought we knew, and help us see history as, well, a conversation that's still going on, not just a bunch of facts set in stone.
And I think that's super important when we're talking about a time period like, well, when Sambhaji Maharaj and Aurangzeb were alive, there are so many different stories, so many ways to look at things, and it's up to each of us to, explore those and come up with our own opinions. Now, before we get to the last part of our deep dive, I want to ask everyone listening, what stands out to you about how Chhava tries to balance historical accuracy with, just telling a good story? It's kind of wild to think about, like how much power a film like Chhava can actually have. We've talked about, well, all the history, the controversies, the stuff the filmmakers had to decide. But in the end, it's really up to the people watching, how they connect with the story.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so interesting. This kind of film, it could be like a lot of people's first introduction to these historical figures, to this whole period in Indian history. It's like you're opening a door to a world they maybe didn't even know existed.
I know, right? You see these larger-than-life people on screen, the battles, all the political stuff, these cultures clashing, and it makes you curious. Suddenly, history isn't just, like, boring dates and names you had to memorize in school. It's alive. It's a story.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to find that balance, between making it entertaining and keeping it real, historically speaking. You want a movie that people enjoy, that they feel something from, but you can't just twist history around to make it a better story.
Because, let's be honest, sometimes real life is way more crazy than anything you could make up. History is full of those kind of stories, with characters so complex you wouldn't believe it if it was fiction.
Totally. And I think that's a big part of why people love historical films. It's like you're discovering something, these hidden stories, and then you get to see them come to life up on the big screen.
Okay, so let's say someone watches Chhava and they come out of the theater thinking, man, Sambhaji Maharaj was amazing. Would you consider that, like, a success?
Absolutely. I mean, that spark of interest, that they admire his courage, how he never gave up, that's a great start. Maybe it'll make them want to learn more about him, read up on the Maratha Empire, understand, like, everything that was going on back then.
And who knows, maybe they'll even start to, like, question the usual stories, think critically about guys like Aurangzeb, see things from different sides.
That would be amazing. That's the goal, right? To get people to move past, like, a simple understanding of history, to really grapple with how complicated it all is. Because, I mean, the more we learn about what came before us, the better we can understand what's happening now and what might happen in the future.
That makes me think about something we've been, like, circling around this whole time. We've talked about how important it is to understand the past, but how does any of this relate to us today? Like, what can we learn from the stories of Sambhaji Maharaj and Aurangzeb and the whole Maratha Empire that matters to our lives now? And
It's a really good question. I mean, at their core, these stories are about courage, about never giving up and fighting for what you believe in. They're about what it means to be a leader, how the choices we make have consequences, and how the past never really goes away.
it's like a reminder that history isn't just something that happened way back when. It's still part of our lives, like a conversation that's still going on.
Exactly. And when we really engage with these stories, when we wrestle with all the complicated parts, well, it helps us understand ourselves better, our communities too, and even the world around us.
So as we wrap this up, I want to leave everyone listening with one last thing to think about. Okay. Imagine you could go back in time and you could talk to either Sambhaji Maharaj or Aurangzeb. You could ask them one question. What would it be? What do you want to know about why they did the things they did? What their struggles were like? What they hope for the future?
And then how would their answers change how we see them and their legacies? Those are the kinds of questions that keep history alive, right?
Yeah.
That make it relevant to us, that connect us to what happened before. So keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and keep that conversation going. It's been great.
Thanks for listening, everybody.